So technology does have, as Irene said, a central part in our lives. A kind of framework for understanding technology is it extends what are essential human characteristics. The history of technology is often traced back to the Olduvai Gorge in Tanzania, where a hand axe was discovered and dated to about 1.6 million years ago. This hand axe has been then found all over the world where people have gone. So it's thought to be the essential technology that humans had for about the first million years of human civilization, or human development, we'll say, when we had modern humans. Cognitive technology really only arose about 3300 BC. So the idea that our memories could be extended by making marks on clay tablets and then baking them in the sun. Some people did some work for some Mesopotamian people, and they were being paid in beer, which was the currency of the time. And so this is a record of who was owed what beer for what work. Assistive technology has a long history as well. The prosthetic limb is probably the oldest assistive technology. So after Greek and Roman soldiers lost limbs in battle, they were provided with often bronze and wood prostheses. So this one here comes from the Second Punic War, so about 200 BC, and is referred to as the capual leg. Now, early on, prostheses were only provided to people who were very high status in society. The soldiers would have been well-regarded people who were then provided with a prosthesis. In the era of the NHS, we aim to provide assistive technologies to those who need them. And indeed, that's why I'm grateful to work in BERT, where we are putting this effort into a kind of democratization of the availability of assistive technologies. I've also included something which was pretty up to date when I first started thinking about this, the DARPA project, which developed a neurally controlled prosthetic arm. So obviously the loss of a limb, the limb length can be extended by the use of the prosthesis. And then these kind of neurally controlled prostheses do allow us to really interface the technology with our minds. So that takes me on to the era, as it were, of assistive technology for cognition. We live largely by the processing of information. Society is organized by the processing of information. Human cognition has been likened to information processors since the 1950s. And some people in various groups around Britain and Ireland back in the late 90s started to appropriate technologies that were being used in other areas of human civilization and employ them in the rehabilitation of people with specific cognitive deficits. So Barbara Wilson and colleagues were intrigued by the difficulty of remembering to do things at a future point. A key feature of executive dysfunction, which is obviously very common amongst people who've suffered a traumatic brain injury. So they developed NeuroPage, adopting the pager technology, storing a central kind of schedule that the person themselves kind of programmed, and then giving them prompts just in time to remind them to do the activities that they had set out to do. Wilson and colleagues published the biggest RCT in the area in 2001, recruiting some 140 people to test the efficacy of NeuroPage, and without a shadow of a doubt, it does improve people's prospective memory. The technology underpinning NeuroPage, the pager, some will see as obsolete or some old-fashioned, but the evidence gathered from that RCT, because it allows us to see that the function of the technology, prompting just in time using text, is what they establish the efficacy for. I would say that the one lesson that we take from this is the technology will change, but if the function of the technology remains the same or similar, we can be confident in using that technology with someone who presents with that same difficulty. Ian Robertson, now at Trinity in Dublin, and colleagues developed an approach to the rehabilitation of visual neglect. So visual neglect after right hemisphere, usually parietal stroke, is a really thorny problem. In about 40% of cases, it persists past the acute phase and is a real limitation in rehabilitation. So if people have neglect, they tend to do less well in their motor rehab. So Ian and his engineering colleagues crossed over those disciplinary divides to develop a technology that would draw people's attention to the neglected part of their body. So if people are neglecting the left limb and not using it, the device would sense, or is designed to sense, that the limb hasn't been moved for a while. And then by emitting a tone that's cancelled by that movement, the person gets a positive reinforcement for basically moving the limb. We used this with a man with persistent neglect and showed that his visuospatial attention improved over the course of the intervention, and his ability to move his arm also kind of showed a positive trend. This is a photograph of my first assistive technology for cognition. This is the iPhone 3. And when I opened this up and took it out of its box and turned it on for the first time, having kind of sketched out the ideas that went into this kind of framework for understanding cognition in terms of the 11 specific mental functions, I was so excited that the designers in Apple had actually gone to the trouble of designing assistive technologies for cognition into their phone. So they had supports for memory on there. The camera allows you to take images that are stored as an external memory. So you have memory for events that are in your phone. There was a voice memo on the home page so that you could record little notes to yourself, thus supporting your memory for thoughts that you had. It has notes on there, so you can also then record if your medium is writing rather than voice recording. We knew at that point that there had been several successful attempts to help people modulate emotion in schizophrenia by having them wear Sony Walkman playing music of their choice. And similarly, the iPod on this device allowed you to modulate your own emotion. Higher level cognition, the calendar. So the calendar could be used for prospective memory tasks. There's a calculator on there. You could use your phone to help your communication. Thought. So you could alter what you're thinking about by looking at supports for that or evidence for that thought on the internet. So Safari was there. You had the experience of self and time, so knowing where you were in the world and how you were getting to your destination using maps. And there was even supports for perception. Now, these were later additions, but what's that song? So you open up your phone, click on Shazam, and it tells you what your song is. So it's perceiving the world for you. Nantworks is an American company which has developed something called the Money Reader. You could take any US, Canadian or British currency, scrunch it up, just make it kind of, it didn't have to be a perfect note, and then shine your phone at it and it would tell you what denomination of money you had and what was the value of that note you had. So if you had a visual perceptual disorder and couldn't tell what was in your wallet, you could with this phone. Movement sequencing. So a lot of the complex activities of daily life are available on YouTube. So if you want to know how to fold a towel to look exactly like it does in a hotel, you can go on YouTube and type that in and they will tell you how to sequence the correct movements in order to achieve that. Unfortunately, I didn't in my survey of that discover anything on there that supported attention, and in fact what I found subsequently is that phones are essentially attention greedy machines that just sap your attention. One thing about maybe the initial Apple developments is before the explosion of app developments that we have had in the time since, is that it was relatively simple. You opened your phone and that's what you saw, and those were the apps on your phone, so it didn't demand attention. To use these technologies now is actually a cognitively demanding task in itself. The line used to be, we've got an app for that. Any kind of human ability, oh, we've got an app for that. But it's just like, where on the screen is the app for that? We'll talk about 4 principles I think we can apply to technology use and development across the board. So whether it is a technology to augment someone's physical function or a technology to augment someone's mental function, these are 4 principles that I think are really important. I'm going to talk about how we match people and their technologies, how we should co-design when we're designing new technologies to meet a specific need, but to meet the need of that person who's sitting there in the room with you co-designing. I'm going to talk about zero-effort technology, and I'm going to talk about affect-aware technology. Matching people and technology is an area that Marcia Shearer and colleagues have really covered. They have developed interview schedules to find out what the person, WANT. So if people who present, the old-fashioned way of doing it was the expert clinician would assess them and prescribe what was available on the shelf. And that generally leads to an abandonment rate of 40%. Whether it's a prosthetic limb or a powered wheelchair or an assistive device, it's generally abandoned 40% of the time. What I like about Shinewater Court is the idea that people can go there and try out technologies. When I got my current bicycle, it was after 4 attempts at using other bicycles and deciding I didn't like them. They were perfectly good bicycles. You know, if someone was prescribing them, they would have said they met my need, but I just didn't like them as much as I liked the bicycle I cycle. So co-design. Matt Jameson, a colleague in Glasgow, looked at available prompting technologies such as Google Calendar. He actually sat down with a group of people who needed support with prospective memory and asked them to use it, asked them what did they think of it. And using those interviews, he was able to find that actually people found that they were too broad. You were presented with far too much information to make choices from on the pages. So he kind of established a principle of deep and narrow. Essentially, the interfaces for any assistive technology should present a limited amount of information, generally asking binary choices, and then giving people kind of a set of prompts. Yeah, allow them to select which of these things might be the thing that they're wanting to prompt themselves with. As you can see in those graphs there, that when the app when it was turned on to have automated reminders to set prompts, people used the device more and they were more likely to achieve their life goals. Zero effort technologies, this is a phrase used by Alex Michaelides and colleagues in Toronto. You see Nigel Harris here, whose organisation Designability developed the Wonder Reminder. And this is a very, very useful piece of kit. It's a plug and play technology. You can literally plug it in, point it where you want the sensor to be triggered by, and then it will give just-in-time information. So if you have a relative who tends to wander out of their house, you might put it by the front door, and it tells them to either not wander or to take some precautions if they are going out, such as to look at what the weather is and wear appropriate clothing, or make sure that they've got their wallet and their phone with them. A man called John, who after a strange kind of intracerebral bleed in his right hemisphere, he was frequently disoriented, woke up in the middle of the night, would wander around the hospital and become quite distressed when people tried to reorient him back to his room. So the Wander Reminder was set up by his door, or actually just over his bed, so that if he got up and out of bed, it would say, "Hi John, just a wee reminder that it is the middle of the night. If you're looking for your toilet, it's just to your left, otherwise maybe go back to bed." And this is the number of times that John left his room in the baseline, so averaging up to 11 times a night, so really, really quite disoriented overnight. And then reduced significantly. And then after we took the device away, a return to baseline, it had an effect that was lasting. The other zero effort technology is Guide, which is one of the technologies that we've developed. Basically, this is also data from John on the left. So he made a lot of errors in his morning routine. He needed a lot of support, which he disliked because he didn't like young girls in their 20s telling him what to do. He was a bachelor. So he was much more accepting of the technology, pointing out the steps in his morning routine, and asking him questions as to whether he'd completed those steps. And you can see there that when Guide was turned on with those heavy black lines, it reduced to near zero the number of errors he made. M-Wave 2, it becomes aware of someone's emotional arousal level by virtue of their heart rate variability. So heart rate variability is a pretty good measure of whether someone is stressed or in a relaxed state. Obviously, alert and attentive states are preferable to dysregulated, hot-headed states when it comes to any degree of cognition. So this is data from a single case study where we had someone who frequently lost his temper over very trivial matters. As you can see in the baseline there, this is his MOAS score, really quite difficult. And then after teaching him to use the biofeedback to regulate his emotional state, you can see very few incidents in the months afterwards. But what you can see in this here is that people in the active group were very distressed and did show high levels of MOAS data. This is overt aggression in the baseline. It dipped when they were being treated, and it increased a little bit in the return to baseline, but not as much as it was. It had all of the sensors that we wanted on there: heart rate variability, temperature, galvanic skin response, so all of the things that would be associated with increase in emotional arousal. We did a lovely study with 2 people where we showed that we could have up to 80% accuracy in predicting emotional outbursts, and up to 62% in predicting normal behaviour. So the specificity wasn't so great. Interestingly, in this, it really did prove the idea that a good night's sleep helps us kind of function a lot better. When we looked at the sleep data, we were getting 82% prediction and 68% prediction of normal behaviour. And with several days lag, so like 3 to 4 days before people started to become very distressed and disturbed, their sleep went off. I'd like to thank the service users and staff at Graham Anderson House who have been good enough to try out these technologies that we've offered, given feedback. Long-term collaborators: Catherine Best at Stirling, Alex Gillespie at LSE, David Conlisk, John Evans at Glasgow, and Sarah De Silva Ramos here in Burt.